I think it depends really on what you understand by surgical strikes. As my article made clear, I was referring to the aerial bombing being advocated by armchair generals on various television shows, because the expression surgical strikes usually refers to airstrikes. And that I thought was a bad idea. First of all, the risks are high because your planes could be shot down. No one just watches with fun while your planes come over their territory. And secondly, because of the other dangers I mentioned of other kinds of escalation. I was surprised to see the phrase surgical strikes being applied to this sort of commando raid across the border. I would not have used the same term, but I certainly did not exclude that. In fact, I didn't discuss it at all because I was hoping it was an actively considered option. But I did tweet an article by a blogger recommending this as soon as it happened, because I had read it. He was referring to Myanmar as the model, but the logic is slightly different. In Myanmar, we were trying to flush out camps of Indian militants. Here we're looking at Pakistanis trying to come across the border. But the logic was the same. Slip across the border, do your work and come back. And that I would not have called surgical strike. So it was merely a definitional difference. I have no problem with, and I never had a problem with this kind of action. So what I liked about the way in which our government and the military in particular handled this was the very responsible and sober way in which the entire action was presented. First of all, you had the army statement, which I thought was a model of very precise, unemotional drafting, which explained the reasoning behind what was going on, the fact that terrorists were massing in 3 or 4 locations and we had to get them before they came and got us. And at the same time that we had no other intentions, we had no offensive action. It was purely a preventive measure, and we had no desire to continue any operations. As far as we were concerned, operations were suspended, which was a very clear signal that we hoped there would be no escalation. As I put it when I explained it to the BBC, I said, look, it's like you spot a burglar in the hedges outside your house, and you go and capture him there or deal with him there, rather than wait for him to shatter your windows and come into your house. We've had a lot of shattered windows in recent years, and we chose at this time that we would hit them before they hit us. You know, the thing is that there is no simple solution, and that I think even those in the army who planned this understand it. This is to send a signal that we won't just keep taking it lying down. You know what has happened over the last 25 years now is, on the one hand, a strategy to keep probing across the ceasefire line and hurting us. Strategy from their side. And a strategy on our side of everything involving resistance, defense, appeasement, political solution in the environment, and continued attempts at talks and conciliation. But never have we taken the battle to the other side. It's striking that even in the Kargil War of 1999, one of the standing instructions to the Indian forces was to not cross the LOC. So the restraint that India has shown has lasted essentially a generation. 25 years is pretty much the entire career of a typical soldier. And that is what we have tied one hand behind their backs all along. So to take the position now that, okay, we've tried that, we know that it doesn't have any long-term effect, and these pokes, if you want to call it that, from Pakistan will continue, so let us now try something else. And I must say I support that conclusion very strongly. I actually made a speech in March, which for some reason is suddenly going viral now, at a Penguin book festival, in which I find that the version that's going viral cuts my speech about halfway. And the second half was discussing what is the way forward. To my mind, talking to the civilian government achieves very little because they have no real power. All that has probably happened despite the civilian government or governments over these years, and the governments have successfully been either unable or unwilling to actually do anything to intercede and stop the malign actions being undertaken out of either ISI headquarters or GHQ Rawalpindi, which is frankly never going to see the light, because from their point of view, their not just survival in positions of great prominence in Pakistan, but their disproportionate control of Pakistani national resources actually depends on the continued hostility with India. So if tomorrow Kashmir was solved overnight, they'd have to invent a new reason to have enough hostility to justify the military being the top of the heap in Pakistan, to the level that no country in the world has an army that disposes of a larger share of that country's GDP or regular budget. Now, in these circumstances, what do? If we can't sort of talk usefully to the government, which is all a civilian government can do, and obviously we know that the military cannot be converted. As I've said, permanent hostility and refusal to talk is a mood, it's not a policy. Talking to people who will not make peace, whether they want to or not, is also not a useful policy. So my advice was essentially to neglect the official side of things with both military and civilians, except to manage the basic minimum. So keep the hotlines between the DGMOs, make sure that unplanned incidents across the LOC don't escalate into major warfare, that kind of thing. So keep things on a low burn, on the back burner, but dramatically open up the space for people-to-people contacts and trade. Now, I know this seems completely illogical, but in fact it's actually very logical. Because what I would be suggesting is that we make unilateral concessions on the visa front, on the trade front. And people say, oh, terrorists will take advantage of that. My answer is, did any of the 2611 killers apply for visas? Terrorists don't need visas. It's ordinary people who are being frustrated by the present climate of hostility between the two countries. Let them come, maybe initially specified categories, business people and traders, journalists, diplomats, retired diplomats, people of a certain known category, sports people definitely. My view is that every Pakistani I've ever met who's been to India loves the place and goes away completely enchanted and entranced. They sort of see a freer version of the society that perhaps many of them would like to build in their own home country. And therefore, we will be by and large, with some exceptions, enlarging the constituency of goodwill in Pakistan towards India and thereby shrinking the space for those who want to translate hostility into warfare and unpleasantness. I might stress that in fact the military there might themselves start developing a vested interest in India, because a lot of export-import companies in Pakistan are actually run by the military. Yeah. Let's do deals with them, let them come in too and have access to the vast Indian market. Ultimately, the more people in Pakistan develop a vested interest in normal relations with India, the more that hostility gets relegated to the back burner. And the space for liberal civil society in Pakistan, which has been shrinking over the last 40 years, ever since the separation of Bangladesh from Pakistan, that space will slowly start expanding again thanks to this approach. Now, you may say this is completely far-fetched, it will never work. The truth is, what else is left to try? We've tried hostility, we've tried peacemaking, we've tried talks, we've tried firing, we've tried war. They've tried war and we've resisted it. And we've tried literally everything short of this. This is the thing that I would do, and it at the same time should be a process which is interruptible. I know there are some friends who call for uninterruptible dialogue and so on. That's not possible, because times come when you are obliged to demonstrate that business as usual is not possible. But even the very fact of interruption can work in our favor, because if there is now a large constituency of people who are used to visas and travel to India and selling their Pakistani designs or clothes or engineering goods or whatever it is to Indian markets, if they feel frustrated that some stupid action by some Lashkar-e-Taiba terrorist has resulted in suddenly all of that being cut off, they will start channeling their frustrations towards the targets in Pakistan who are making their prospects of dealing with India difficult. So the interruption, as I said, can actually reinforce the policy. This is the way that I would go, and I would do it systematically, not, as I said, naively or uninterruptedly, and certainly initially on the basis of fairly sensible checks and so on, but I would lift as many restrictions as possible and open up the space. I would certainly not be sending back Pakistani singers and actors from Bollywood. That was one of the most stupid things that this government allowed to see happen. No, I don't regret as such, because I think it had to be tried. How long it should have been tried and with what effort it should have been tried is a different issue. I mean, I must say that in Dr. Manmohan Singh, we had a pretty good peacemaker because he was somebody who was born in Pakistan, who had a genuine fellow feeling for people there. Let's face it, if you are going to see the Pakistani attitude to India is impelled by a dislike of Hindus, well, Manmohan Singh is not a Hindu. So that too could have been perhaps a positive factor in facilitating dialogue from his side. And as you know, the so-called back channels actually worked rather well in coming up towards some sort of formula that perhaps might have worked. I've had Pakistanis say that indeed the back channel was close to a solution until Mr. Musharraf lost the political power in Pakistan to sell it to the military. And when his own position became weak, the thing went down the tubes, but till then a solution was likely. Mr. Kasuri's book has outlined it. So in all these ways, I think that Mr. Manmohan Singh's efforts in UPA were worth backing, but with obviously some degree of skepticism about sincerity on the other side. And in any case, that has now foundered, so it's time to try something different. But, well, I think the Congress Party has not endorsed war or anything like that. What the Congress Party has endorsed is one specific action. And I think this is normal to stand behind your government at a time of stress like this. It's striking that the same thing has happened in Pakistan, as I've frequently predicted it would, that every time there's an attack from India, however small or big, that immediately there'd be a rallying around the flag, and all the opposition parties, which had been so critical of Nawaz Sharif, from Imran Khan's party to Bilawal Bhutto's PPP, have immediately started saying that we are with the Prime Minister, we are with the country, etc., against Indian aggression and this kind of talk. I mean, this is natural. The same thing happens in our country and it happens there. So I don't think that on an issue of national security you're going to see much difference, unless there is a case in which the Congress Party has any reason to believe that the government has gone too far or acted too irresponsibly or said the wrong things or done so for blatantly domestic political motives and so on, and none of which in this case apply. Well, the fact is there are also exercises going on with Russia here. We've had long relations with Russia and the Pakistanis have not. Yeah. But just as we are widening our options and are trying to maximize the number of countries with whom we have close relations, and we see no reason to continue the earlier policies of distance with the US, by the same token, Russia is saying, why should we only tie ourselves to India? Why should we close off all possibility of relations with Pakistan? But both strategically and geopolitically, on issues of Islamist extremism and many other matters, Russia does not see eye to eye with Pakistan. This is just a country saying, yeah, we too can expand our friendships, just as India is doing, we'll also do it. But given how important the relationship is to both India and Russia, for example, on the military front and the supply of everything from equipment to spare parts, I don't see either India or Russia gaining from a serious estrangement, and I don't think one is going to happen. Maybe we should. I would drop into Diego Garcia more often and use the facilities there. As a student of history, I haven't forgotten that Diego Garcia was actually used by the Portuguese to base themselves when they raided Kerala's coast and the western coast as well. So I wouldn't mind seeing Indian ships using this agreement and going off to the US base in Diego Garcia, which the Americans lease from the British. Even if we're not sailing off to Newport, Rhode Island every other day, we can certainly use American facilities closer to home. We do have ships going to the South China Sea. Let's go to Subic Bay in the Philippines. Let's go to other American installations wherever they are. But no, that's not a major priority. I agree, and I'm not suggesting that's the whole answer. The whole answer is it's partly about the bases. Base is the wrong word. Facilities. But it's more partly, I think, about the signaling of a willingness to expand the potential for collaboration across the board. We are expecting the Americans to be helpful to us when it comes to issues of defense security. We are expecting the Americans, for example, to share with us some of their intelligence intercepts when it comes to Islamist terrorism in our neighborhood. We're expecting them to show some sympathy to our security preoccupations with regard to their ally Pakistan, etc., etc. And if we give nothing in return, that will affect the quality of what we get from them. So my view is that giving something relatively modest in order to gain much more across the board is actually wise policy. And some of these negotiations go back to the UPA days. I agree the UPA government did not agree to sign it, and the NDA took its time, which shows that our defence establishment, both the armed uniformed personnel and the civilian bureaucracy, thought about all this through very, very carefully before concluding that on balance we gained more than we lost. No, we are not actually aligning ourselves with the US and the South China Sea. We are aligning ourselves with the principle that international law should be respected. No, it worries us a lot if China cocks a snook at international law, because international law is the one thing that ensures for us that the Chinese behavior vis-a-vis their problems with us, namely the frontier, is kept within containable legal bounds. It's striking, for example, that on the waters issue, which came into the fore recently on Indus waters, that China and us don't have an equivalent of the Indus Waters Treaty. And yet we are hoping and managing the Brahmaputra will be dealt with by the Chinese with some respect for international legal principles and customary law.
Then
that depends on your calculations. To my mind, China has chosen to back Pakistan for its own reasons. In the Indo-Pakistan divide of the subcontinent, China has chosen not to settle this long disputed frontier, even though it settled its land frontiers with every other country. China has not yet taken advantage of the very generous lifting of restrictions on its investment in India that Mr. Modi announced, lifting the earlier UPA-era restrictions on Chinese investments in telecoms, power stations, and in ports, all of which have been lifted by this government. So if China doesn't make any step forward, why do you want us always to make the step forward? They are still refusing to give visas to people born in Arunachal. They are still persisting in their claim to a state where we have 250,000 Indian citizens who have no desire to suddenly become somebody else's citizens. They have still chosen to show a certain amount of hostility in the UN Sanctions Committee, supporting Pakistan by holding up the sanctioning of Masood Azhar, the way Hafiz Saeed was sanctioned. So given all of this, I must say I would have every reason to say that the shoe is on the other foot. It's half a dozen things that the Chinese are doing that they don't need to do to a country that has really not shown them any hostility. And for India, therefore, to affect its relationship with a third country in order not to make the Chinese unhappy would be an inadmissible sign of weakness that I'm not prepared to support.